I have weird hobbies, nothing criminal, mind you, just a little off the beaten track. And one thing a number of years ago I became obsessed with was being able to make fire, just to make fire, right? Everyone in this room knows the principles of making fire. You know, you rub two sticks together. In the movies, poof, there's a fire. Have you ever tried to rub two sticks together? It requires a lot of, more patience than I possess, strength, and a lot of skill. It really does. So I left that aside and I went to flint and steel because I thought, little later tech, but I can master this, right? I can make a fire with flint and steel after 3 years, about 25% of the time. The rest of the time, if there's anybody standing nearby, I just embarrass myself badly. It's a multi-step process to do something very, very basic that in average day, if you have a gas stove at home, you literally push a button or flick a switch or on your barbecue. It's very, very easy. You have those sparkers from the dollar store, you know, the ones that you have to have weightlifter strength to actually get to work, and then they work for exactly 3 seconds and then they're out of fuel. Those. Why am I telling you this? I think the modern age has degraded the survival and living skills of almost everybody. Not everybody, but most people. My mom can do, she can make clothes, she can knit, she can sew. Inexplicably, everybody in the 70s did macrame. But a whole level of skill sets, but a lot of those are getting lost. Because you can go to the store and buy cheap clothes, and you know, so why do all these things? Why am I saying this? Because as we lose the sense of how difficult simple things actually are, it's sort of changed the mentality in society. I'll give you another example. It's tangential to this, but it's in the same vein. So if you were in the 1930s, you were you started out when you were 16 or 17 as a shoe salesman. You worked at the same company for 40 years. And you got married, you had a family, had an apartment. If you were lucky, you had a house. Maybe you got a car. And you worked hard at that your whole life. In your church community and in the community in general, you'd be respected. You'd be a respected person. Because people would recognize the work it took to do that. In 2024, you could do exactly the same thing. You're a loser because you're a shoe salesman. And that's true. And we have millions upon millions of people on YouTube channels doing and saying the most ridiculous things. And what's the word they use for them? What do they call it? Nobody else calls them this. It's like, they have a name for themselves that nobody else uses, but they use. It's sort of like when you meet the embarrassing older guy who wears the captain's cap, and when you're introduced to him, he says, "Everyone calls me the captain," and his poor long-suffering wife in the background does this. He desperately wants people to call him the captain, but no one does. Influencers influence nobody, and they call themselves that. But it seems that we've had an inversion where if an individual can make a maximum amount of money, the point is to make that money with the minimal amount of input. And that's a respected person. But if you have that maximal amount of money, but you've got to work 60 to 80-hour weeks, you're a loser. It's a weird thing. We forget in the simple things in the world how many steps there are to those things and how difficult they are. I've used this example, but it's the best one I can think of. Go to the store, we go right now, and buy a loaf of bread, which costs approximately 50 times what it did 10 years ago, but that's not the point. So you go, you can get a loaf of bread. The number of steps and people that had a hand in getting you that loaf of bread, it's dozens of people. It's not just the farmers that grew it and the truckers that took the wheat to the grain elevator, or the truckers that took from that grain elevator to the terminal grain elevators where it gets sold to big mills that actually make the bread or make the products that go to bakeries where they make the bread, and then it goes to a retail store where we go and buy the bread. There's a lot of people involved. But the trouble with today is, unless you've got the sexy thing of the owner of the store driving the expensive car, everyone else in that equation is a loser. But if it wasn't for every one of those people, you'd have no bread. What's the job, the worst, universally used by people to scare their kids into going to university? Quite frankly, most of the time to get useless degrees like mine. You don't want to be a garbage man. I don't know, they're unionized. I wouldn't want to do it only because of the lifting part. But would I do it for the cash? And yeah, what's wrong with being a garbage man? And if the garbage goes on strike for 3 weeks, yeah, it gets bad, especially in big cities, like really bad. If any kind of linesmen who reconnect our electricity after a storm, they go on strike, and we don't have enough of them. I'm just saying this in a very, very roundabout way. When I look at Corinthians, as a Christian community, you have this list of the different callings of people. But first, let me go to Nehemiah. Nehemiah talks about joy, but it's specific joy. Go your way, eat the fat, and drink the sweet wine, and send portions of them to those for whom nothing is prepared. For this day is holy to the Lord, and do not be grieved. And here's the line. For the joy of the Lord is your strength. The joy of the Lord is your strength. How do we feel the joy of the Lord? By doing what the Lord calls you to do. The church has a calling, but you have a calling. And this is true. And I wish I had believed my parents when I was younger. Not my dad. My dad wanted me to be an accountant. And if there is like a limbo or a terrible place where I got to earn my way into heaven, I'll be an accountant in that place. I love accountants because they help me out. I could never do that. Once again, it's one of those jobs I could never do. But I wish I believed my parents when they said, do what you love to do. Earlier in my life. You feel the joy of the Lord when you do what you are called to do. And not everyone, in fact, the majority of Christians are not called to deeds of power. We're called to service. Let me give you an example of a person I admire. Not a specific person, but a specific calling. People who work in hospices. And sit with people who, when they meet them, they know will be dead within the next month. Meet them, meet their families, become invested in their lives, sit by them and help them die. And then the next day come back in to meet a new family and that is a calling. And for those who work that job for pay because we have to eat and the worker deserves their wages, they don't make a lot. They really don't make a lot. But man, a calling, a job, being a nurse, ditto. Being a medical professional in general to me is amazing when I see that. A broken body, and then like a mechanic, you can put the things together and the person lives and is mended. Take a knife, cut a person wide open, put your hands inside of them, move some things around, tie some things down, maybe take 1 or 2 things out, and the person becomes better. That's astounding to me. But it's also astounding to me that someone who can do a job that's a difficult or a dirty job day in, day out, hour after hour, week after week, that is so respectful, I can't tell you. And in the Christian church, when I look through Corinthians here, the joy of the Lord is upon all of these things. Apostles, prophets, teachers, those who perform deeds of power are called to do, gifts of healing, forms of assistance, forms of leadership, various kinds of tongues. And then here's the important rub. Are all apostles? Are all prophets? Are all teachers? Do all work miracles? Do all possess gifts of healing? Do all speak in tongues? Do all interpret? Strive for the greater gifts. What are the greater gifts? The greatest gift is the one that you are personally called to do. It could be working in a hospice. It could be making sure that we have these beautiful linens set out. It could be helping to perform our music. It could be help greeting people at the door. And all of these things. If one of them didn't exist, we wouldn't be whole. And as Christians, I find, especially in today's day and age, and especially with our younger generations, they are beaten down before they've even got out of the gate. And they're beaten down because of the colossal expectations that they have placed upon themselves. It's not good enough just to work a 40-hour-a-week job. They have to be famous. They have to influence people. They have to use their influence to affect global events, climate change, racial justice, economic justice. And they're 17 years old. And you know what effect most of them will have on that? None. Why? Because they're defeated before they get out of the gate. Because the entire world does not revolve on 1 or 2 or 10 or 50 important people at the top. It revolves on the people who collect our garbage and the people who do all of the tasks, cutting our lawns, painting the things that need painting, fixing the lights. All of these tasks. Our clothing sale. People need to sort those clothes. It just doesn't get done. Look how important that job is. We're getting clothes to people who otherwise couldn't afford those clothes. How important is that? Everything we all do is important. But if we allow our locus of motivation, or the site of our motivation to be outside of ourselves instead of internal, we're often not going to be doing what God calls us to do. If you do what God is calling you to do, you'll know it. Why? Because you'll feel joy in doing it. And it might not be the sexiest job. Personally, I would love to have the gift of healing. Do you know why I don't have the gift of healing? Because I would love to have the gift of healing. And I would absolutely be the wrong person to have it. Why? Because I would love to have it. You see how it works? Instead, I know from personal experience, God tries to make me more patient. And it's a big job. How do you make a person more patient? You just constantly trip them up. Until they become more patient or not, as the case may be. So when you read these readings, I want you to start small and then work your way up, as opposed to starting huge and working your way back down. Because that second way will make you feel like you're failing. But the first way will give you that sure and certain knowledge that you are not failing. That you are moving into the person Christ meant you to be in the first place. Now, many of you have already found that position. Some of you haven't. But like I said, don't start out here. I have to plant churches and make thousands of converts. And I don't know who can start out there and not have that and immediately discourage them. But instead, as it says in Scripture, if I put you in charge of small things, and this is paraphrasing. If I give you small tasks to do and you do them well, I will give you more to do. And then I will give you more to do, and I will give you more to do. I'll leave you with this. A phenomena I noticed with my brother and my dad. Both firefighters, both had done CPR on people who were in terrible car accidents, tried to hold them together in time for the paramedics to get there and hopefully save them, right? Do you know how many car accidents, when I was around them, how many car accidents they came upon just in the course of a day? 10 times the ones I did. Why? Because they're disaster magnets? No, because they could help. And instead of asking what accidents happen, instead see in God the fact that He puts people there that can help at the time. And to be one of those people, no matter what the task is, that's glorious. The struggle is the glory in these things. Amen.